Hey everybody, Charles for HumbleMechanic.com. Today I'm going to be taking your questions on dipsticks, Dieselgate, electrical problems, and more. This is episode 99 of the Humble Mechanic Podcast. So like I said, this show I will be taking your questions. To get a question on a show like this, email me, charles@humblemechanic.com, and be sure to put question for Charles in the subject. I use that as a way to filter out your emails so that I make sure I get your questions on a show. Otherwise, it may get lost in the spam folder or lost in the weird internet abyss. But before we get into the show, let's talk about the sponsor of the day, which is CRP Automotive. CRP deals in a ton of OE maintenance and repair parts. Everything from timing belts to suspension components and even fluids. In fact, they make the factory DSG fluid for Volkswagen and Audi. So check them out at crpautomotive.com. Also, I mentioned that I'm going to be taking a question about this whole Dieselgate fiasco. I did an entire video specifically on the topic a couple of days ago, so I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to check out all of that. Today we're not going to get super deep into it. I'm still kind of in this waiting period to see what happens with Volkswagen and Audi and what comes down as far as a repair solution. So if you want to know the full details as far as I know them, check out that video. All right, let's get into your question. First one comes from Bruce. He says, I love your show. My question is, I have a 2012 Passat TDI and I hate the dipstick. It's impossible to read accurately. Is there a shop trick you know of to read it accurately, or is there an aftermarket replacement that's easier to read? Thanks, Bruce. Bruce, you know, that's a really good point. Some of these new dipsticks with different layers of plastic and the hatching's weird, they are really hard to read. And I don't understand why it's such a fancy thing to get this crazy dipstick on some modern Volkswagens. But you're right, man. Sometimes it's really hard to see, especially the darker plastic ones. The two VRs that I have in here, they're both metal dipstick all the way down. It's pressed a little bit in the spot where it's supposed to be, so even if you can't read and see the hashes in the dipstick, you can tell just by the difference of the dipstick plane where the oil level is supposed to be. As far as shop tricks, not really. Remember that we change oil all day long, so we have a known amount that goes into each car. Now, I highly recommend you always check your oil level before you start the car when you're doing an oil change. That goes for the DIYers as well as the techs. But usually what I do is I try and find that top line, and it may take 2 or 3 times of pulling the dipstick out, wiping the dipstick, putting it back in, to make sure that you get a clean measurement on the dipstick. Also remember, unless you're driving one of the really new Volkswagens, like the new Sportwagen Golfs, the level of oil on the dipstick isn't super critical. Now, before everybody freaks out, what I mean by that is if you're 1 millimeter high or 1 millimeter low on the dipstick, it's not really that big of a deal. Now, if there's no oil at all on the dipstick, that's a problem. If the oil is halfway up the dipstick, that's also a problem. But 1 or 2 millimeters off isn't really that big of a deal. Using a dipstick isn't the most accurate way to measure oil level anyway. I usually try to target the oil level at the midpoint of the hash marks. And that should be quite a bit easier to see and way easier to hit the level than trying to get it right at the top level of the full mark. And the reason I brought up the Sportwagen is they have an oil level sensor that'll tell you when there's too much oil, and they're really sensitive. So you don't want to fill it all the way to that very, very top line. And then when the oil gets hot, it's even higher. You can end up triggering the oil to full light. As far as aftermarket solutions, I don't think so. I don't know if there's a big aftermarket solution for dipsticks. Generally they're kind of OE only unless you're going into a generic dipstick. That's another thing you can do. You can kind of make your own with a piece of wire or something like that. I don't know, it is a hassle sometimes to read the oil level, but if your car doesn't have a problem, you're checking it every 3 weeks, once a month, hopefully it's not a big deal, but maybe that's a great business for someone to start, honestly, is aftermarket, easy to read dipstick. So Bruce, start a company and make awesome aftermarket, easy to read dipsticks and let me know and I'll be more than happy to get behind you, man. Awesome question though, and again, I think it's just a matter of checking it 2 or 3 times to make sure that you have the level right. All right, next one comes from RT. It says, I have a 2010 Jetta Wolfsburg that has a strange electrical issue you may have some insight on. I get a random shudder and can hear what I suspect are relay switching in the dash, left of the steering column. I say random, but there's one spot where I can almost always guarantee it will happen. And it just so happens there's a cell tower less than a mile ahead. Any thoughts? Not sure if this is connected, but I had a time when my DSG would randomly go into neutral and would drift off the highway. Then I had to restart it to get it going again. That's a lot of possibility with a very little bit of information, but let's see if we can kind of unweave some of the things that are going on. Having a cell tower a mile ahead probably isn't an issue. It probably doesn't have any relationship to what's happening with your car, but I definitely wouldn't discount that. There's spots on 95 that, there's wires over the highway, and I've had my radio cut out, my Bluetooth disconnect from the radio, weird things like that, but never an issue with the actual vehicle. You mentioned the DSG issue with it kicking it into neutral. I have experienced that. I've had that happen on a couple of cars. Early 09s, it seemed to do it most often. And what was happening is there's a sensor inside for temperature. I think there's actually 2 temperature sensors, probably more than that. And what was happening is the temperature sensor was failing or providing an erroneous reading, and it would kick the transmission into neutral to cool it down. Well, the transmission wasn't really overheating, it was just the bad reading from the sensor. There was a software update that was supposed to correct some of that. I have had to replace a few of those sensors as well. It's actually right behind the mechatronics unit in the DSG. Not terribly hard to replace, but you do have to pull the mechatronics unit out in order to get to that sensor. So that may be contributing to what's going on. I've also seen issues with ECM power supply relays causing similar problems to that. Generally, though, you have a check engine light or a traction control light that'll also go along with these issues. So first thing I would do is take it somewhere that can scan all of the control modules, or get something like VAGCOM so you can do it yourself. Scan all the control modules and see what's going on. You may just be losing power really quick. I've seen ignition switches do similar things to that too, so that may be another path that you want to explore. But we really need to look at what the shudder is. Is it a shudder like we feel we're running out of fuel? Is it a shudder like we feel we're losing power to the car, like you would shut the key off? That may be an indicator of your ignition switch failing. Or is it a shudder like a weird, poor quality shift, which may bring us back into having a DSG issue? So a lot going on. What I would recommend, and this really goes for everybody and not just RT's specific situation, if you have something failing, write down all of the things that are going on with it, and then all of the possibilities, and then kind of work from easy checks to hard checks, and most likely to least likely on your list. And that'll probably put you on the right path to figuring out exactly what's going on. All right, next one comes from Bailey. Great show, I'm learning a lot. Keep up the good work. Thanks, Bailey. I have a question regarding timing chain tensioners for the TSI engine. I have a 2011 GTI, which means I have the old revision. The Mark 6 forums make it sound like everyone with the old revision will eventually have it fail on their car and blow up the engine. Would you recommend that I replace the tensioner for preventative maintenance? And while I'm in there, would you also recommend all the chains and guides be replaced as well? Bailey, awesome question. So I've done a video on some of the failures of this timing chain tensioner. I will put a link in the show notes if you guys want to check that out. Also, there's a great article on shopdap.com also about the timing chain tensioners. I'll be sure to put a link to that as well. As far as, so you got kind of 2 questions. One, do I need to replace it as preventative maintenance? If it were my car, I would. A year and a half ago, I might have said, they're not really that common. But honestly, as time goes on, we're seeing more and more and more and more and more fails. So yeah, I would replace it as preventative maintenance. It's not a cheap repair. I think a lot of places are charging $900 to $1,400 depending on how much gets replaced. That's a ballpark figure. It may be less, it may be more. I really don't know. But it's not $100. It's going to be expensive. The alternative, like you said, engine blowing up is a little bit more extreme than what actually happens. But yeah, it can be catastrophic engine damage. It really depends on when the chain tensioner actually does fail. While I was in there, would I replace all the parts? Maybe. It really depends on the mileage that I'm doing this at. If I'm doing this at 80,000 miles, I'm probably not going to put a chain on it. I'm probably not going to put guide rails in it. I'm probably just going to put a tensioner and cover on. And the reason I'd put the cover on is the metal is really soft and it's really easy to bend it taking it off, as well as there's a seal where the crank pulley goes that can get distorted as well. So I would put the cover on. The cover's not cheap either, but it's going to save you a lot of headache and probably a lot of oil leaks down the road. Now, would I fault someone for putting a chain on it and putting guide rails in it? Absolutely not. I wouldn't fault you one bit at all. To do the chain though is more work than just to put the tensioner on. There's actually 3 chains that are ran off that crank pulley. There's the oil pump, the balance shaft, and the camshaft chain. So you're gonna have to pull all of that stuff off to replace all those parts. And again, I'm not faulting anybody for doing it, but it is more work, it is more time, so it's gonna cost you more money. Unlike the 2.5 liters, we really don't see issues with the chain stretching, we see issues with the tensioners failing. So if it were my car, again, I'd put the cover on, I'd put the tensioner on, and that's all I would do. The other side of that is if for some reason it lasts 200,000 miles on the original set, you know, maybe at 200,000 miles I would put chains, guides, I would do all of it and then be good, you know, for another 200,000 miles hopefully. But unless your car has really crazy high mileage, I probably would just do the tensioner, do the cover, and rock and roll and never worry about it again. All right, next one comes from Steven. When replacing Mark IV Ebrake cables, is there a special way to undo and redo the metal tie down that holds the cables to the axle, or is it just a matter of brute force? There is not a super secret way to do those. They're just kind of a pain in the butt. Usually you wind up bending the metal. A Mark IV, remember, is 99.5 or 98 technically in the Beetle, to 05 or I think 2010 with the Beetle as well. So we have a lot of cars over a long span of time. The majority of them are 99.5 to early 05. So we're talking about cars that now are really dangerously close, you know, to 18 to 20 years old. If I were doing that, it would really depend on where I got my parts. If I'm buying them from the dealership, those cables have been updated. So now you're replacing the cable and you're replacing all the little brackets that hold the cable in its proper place because they've actually made the cables a bigger diameter cable with a bigger sheathing. So you need to replace those parts. It's expensive to do it that way though. If I'm buying non-dealership parts, then we can reuse those clips. But usually unlocking it and kind of walking that clip down is the best way to do it. A trim clip remover works pretty well for that in addition to just a little bit of patience. Most of the time you wind up tweaking it pretty significantly. I've been able to bend most of them back into place so that it holds the cable. So awesome question, Steven. Good luck, man. All right, next one comes from Robert. He says, hey Charles, I'm curious if you know where those of us with 2013 Jetta TDIs fall regarding high pressure fuel pump failures outside of the 60K powertrain warranty. I was frustrated to learn that Volkswagen did not include 2013s in their recent warranty extension, and I'm curious as to what your experience has been with 2013 failures since the recent extension has been in effect for 2012 and older models. Has Volkswagen been fixing the 2013 claims outside of the 60K as they have in the past, or are they only repairing 2012 and older outside of 60? I haven't had any issues personally, but I would certainly be reassured to hear they're still repairing them as I near 60K in the future. Robert, awesome question. So Volkswagen issued a warranty extension on high pressure fuel pumps. It covered the older ones, it didn't cover the newer ones. I haven't replaced a ton of newer ones. The majority of the failures have been kind of 2011 and back. Not too much in the newer one. I think I've done one 2012 and that was the newest one that I had done. As far as catastrophic failure, I have replaced a few on Passats. I did one on a new Beetle, so there are newer ones that are failing. It's been a while since I've seen one, but it has happened. As far as replacement or repair past 60,000 miles, that's really case by case. It really depends. One of the things that it depends on is how past 60,000 miles are you? Are you at 60,100 miles? Well, they're probably gonna take care of that. I can't guarantee it. I can't say yes for sure 100%. Warranty claims outside of the warranty period, even honestly warranty claims inside the warranty period, are a case-by-case basis, so it all depends. Now, what would happen to me if this were my car and I was, let's say, at 70,000 miles and had a high-pressure fuel pump failure? I would have taken it to the dealership, they would have diagnosed it as a failing high-pressure fuel pump and given me a quote of whatever it costs, $3,000, say. My very first thing I would do is call Volkswagen of America, give them my situation, and let them know what's going on. And I would ask for help. I wouldn't hesitate to ask for help one bit. The record of high pressure fuel pump failures is pretty significant. If it wasn't, they would have never issued a warranty extension on the older ones. So that would be my very first step. Pick my phone up, give them a call, and ask for assistance. They may help you. They may say, we'll pay for everything. They may say, we'll pay for half. They may say, we'll pay for parts. They may say, you're on your own. Sorry, good luck. We have nothing that we can offer you. This is 100% case by case. There's no blanket, they're covering them all. There's no blanket, they're covering none of them. Case by case by case. So If it happens and you have a failure, pick up your phone, call Volkswagen, and try and get some help. But Robert, let's all hope for your sake that you don't ever have to make that phone call. All right, I got time for one more, and this is the one I think you guys have all been waiting for, the Dieselgate question. This one comes from Ed. It says, Charles, I don't want to fix. I like my car. I live in NC, and we do not test emissions on diesel vehicles. It has always been like the state was just saying, well, it's a diesel, what are you going to do? Why would I have to have any corrections made to my car? Ed, awesome question, and this has kind of been something that a lot of people are worried about. So the Dieselgate thing, right, blown up everywhere. I feel like all the information that I've gotten in my brain over the last week and a half has been Dieselgate stuff. Ed, thank you for the really good, solid question, because this is one that I would be concerned about if I owned a TDI as well. Again, like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I'll put a link to a video I did specifically on this Dieselgate thing. But to answer your question, Ed, I don't think you should have to get your car fixed, but what I think about the situation is rather irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. I watched a video with an interview from someone from CARB, the California Air Resource Board. They said that owners will have 6 months to get their car fixed after the fix comes out. And if they don't, they're going to block registrations. Now, that's in California. California has the strictest emissions controls in the country. They also have ways to track whether you get these software updates done, according to a buddy of mine. So I feel bad for you folks in California that drive TDIs, especially the cars that are not SRC cars, the cars that have AdBlue in them, the 09 to 14 Jettas and Golfs that are TDIs that don't have AdBlue. You guys are the ones that are going to be concerned about. Ed has a Jetta Sport Wagon that falls in that category. So in a state like California, they've flat out said, we will be blocking your registration. You won't be able to get renewal of tags. Apparently you'll be owning a car that's illegal to own in California. So that's hence the blocking of registration. What's going to happen with, this software update? If the software update is the fix, I don't know. Again, we don't know what's going to happen and what's going to change. States like California, you're not going to have a choice, it sounds like. Ed, for you, states like North Carolina, you may have that choice. North Carolina doesn't do emissions inspections on TDIs. They only do safety inspections. So they're not going to hook your car up to a computer and check to see if you've had a software update in states like North Carolina, and probably the majority of the states in the country. So is there going to be ways around that in California? I got a good feeling that there is. I feel like people are going to get this software update, pick up the phone, call Kerma, call Malone, and get a tune done on their car. And then, it's passed, and now we're going back to more performance and more fuel economy. That may just be one way around it. There's a lot of really smart, clever people out there that are going to figure out how to pass what they need to pass as far as the state's concerned, and then get their fuel economy, get their power back. If that even happens, if losing horsepower and losing fuel economy is even what the result of this software update is, again, we really don't know till it comes out and we start doing these updates on cars. And that's the only way that we're gonna know what's gonna happen. So Ed, for you, I probably wouldn't worry about it. It doesn't sound like it's gonna be an issue in all states. At this point anyway, that may change. For you folks in California, again, I'm sorry, you live in the state that has the strictest emissions controls in the country, and it sucks, and I feel bad for you, and I don't know what you're going to be able to do to get around it, if anything. So hopefully the solution works to where it's not a huge hit to fuel economy or horsepower in the cars that don't have selective reductant cats. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap it up there. If you have any questions or comments, post it in the comments section below. Hey, if you like the video, throw it a thumbs up on YouTube. I always appreciate that. You can also subscribe on YouTube or on the blog at humblemechanic.com. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the blog, and obviously here on YouTube. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. No beer of the day. It's early on Saturday, so we're still on drinking coffee, and actually buy our coffee from Whole Foods. It's pretty affordable, and for the price, it's some of the best coffee I've had.